I don't think there's a peak age for creative ability, but I do think we have to recognise the demands of the creative industry.
So, Rianna, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. We're going to talk a bit about your career and what age in design means to you. So you began your career as a designer before transitioning your expertise into the world of client services at some incredible agencies like Design Bridge, Pearlfisher, Love, Brand Opus and Bulletproof. And now you're at Taxi as client lead. So I'd love to know more about your current role and what you love about it as well.
Yeah. My current role at Taxi Studio is a client lead, as you mentioned, and that involves leading the development of some key global accounts. But what that really means in layman's terms is that we have to build relationships with our clients and internally to make sure that we're shepherding brands that have been around for many, many years in the right direction and keeping them one step ahead of their competitors. So what I like about it most is the interaction with people, the relationship building, and the creative problem solving that brings as well.
I love the term shepherding for what you do. You're a shepherd at Taxi Studio. I love that. So we're here to talk about age and the generational kind of breadth that a design team has. So generally, how does generational diversity impact a creative team in your eyes?
It's an interesting topic because it does and it doesn't, I think, in some ways. And I know that's a very woolly answer, but I'll explain what I mean by that. We have experienced different things growing up and we've been introduced to the industry in different ways. And I think the biggest shift has been technology. I trained as a designer, so we were taught software at university that was the latest and the greatest. And we were also taught that we shouldn't jump straight into technology and that we should be creating using our minds and pen and paper. It was almost seen as lazy to create directly with digital mediums. But I think that's moved on quite a lot now, and there's some value in using technology to change your approach to design, whether that's through, speed, making it faster to get your ideas down, or whether that's just the way you think better, because I think we're the first generation of digital natives. So if you're born in that way, thinking in that way, then I think you are going to be accessing your brain in a very different way and accessing creativity in a different way. So I think there's room for all of it. And I don't think it makes you better or worse to approach it in that way. I think the diversity of approach is really important.
Absolutely. And that spans everything from technical aptitude to kind of approach to work and work-life balance attitude, and all sorts of things are tied up in that. Would you say, so that obviously younger designers are more tech natives and feel more comfortable using new technologies potentially, and older generations, do you feel that they have stronger softer skills or power skills, as we like to call them?
Not always.
No?
I think this is the big caveat with generational diversity. It does impact how you approach life to a degree, but we are also all individuals with strengths and areas of expertise that we're just interested in. So I think we can't bundle people into these groups and not allow them to break out of them. So I guess, yes, in some cases, people who are of an older generation might be much more used to sitting down with a sketchbook or fleshing out an idea by talking about it before they go into that sort of more solo creation craft world.
Yeah.
And also we've got to recognise that they're probably in different roles because of where they are in their career, usually. So I do think that there's probably a lot of elements at play that will impact that, not just generational diversity.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And brings me to my next question, which is, in your role as client lead, obviously I've got a lot of love for client services because it's what I used to do. And you're really that kind of glue of collaborating between teams and disciplines, between clients, even between other clients, between external partners. So how do you kind of level the playing field and make sure that collaboration happens effectively with such different disciplines and such a diverse team to work with?
I'm not sure leveling the playing field is ever possible, to be honest. I think it's about looking at individuals' skills and seeing where they're best played, almost like thinking of your total team and looking at, who is, I was going to do a football analogy then, but I know nothing about football.
Do you want to
so
try?
I'm not going to do that.
I wouldn't know if it was right or wrong, so you can go with it if you want.
I think it is about your team, though. You're looking at who is best for, effective communication. You're looking at who's best for sitting down and planning and thinking things through. You're looking at who is going to be able to come up with those big ideas and who's going to be able to craft them. And I think that it's important to have a mixture of those skills within one team. And that's the great thing about agencies, right, is that you can pull on those skills and talent when you need it.
But that's a skill in itself, is to make sure that you are harnessing individual talents and care abouts, but while making everyone's opinion valid and making everyone feel valued.
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that?
I think for me, the first thing that I recognise is that everyone has value. I don't see that in business all the way through and leadership all the way through. My career has been very different experience of people kind of seeing people for fitting in that box. But actually, if you look at them as an individual and say, this is their talent area, this is their area of development, then it doesn't mean that they can't stretch into those development areas, but really get them out and let them play up front when they are doing something that they're really good at.
Yeah.
So I think it's about talking to them as well, and not just assuming that just because there's a job description on the page doesn't mean that, there's not another approach to it and that they have to tick off everything within that job description. And I know that's controversial because that's what job descriptions are for. But sometimes people are just really, really struggle at one thing, or they're really, really good at something that may be stretching them into their next kind of job bracket.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not let them, run with that?
Yeah, I love that. I feel really passionate about that personally, is that when you know what you're good at or what you care about is a superpower in itself. It allows you to know what to lean into, what you need to learn about. And it's a real strength.
Yeah.
Job descriptions aside, I completely agree with that point. So, provocative question now. Is there a peak age to work in the creative industry, in your opinion?
I don't think there's a peak age for creative ability and creative problem solving. But I do think we have to recognise the demands of the creative industry and how our values change through our lives. So that's probably less about generational differences, but more about where you are in your life stage. If you've got, children and family versus if you're kind of less tied down to a home location, you might really want to go on that business trip versus someone who, might be committed to a hobby that they do regularly once a week and they don't necessarily want to. So I think it's about what you value and where you are in your life, which will affect how much you dive into that world and how much you can commit to that, because there are extremely high demands on us, I think, as not just in client services, but across the board.
Absolutely. I completely agree. The pressure, the commitment, the additional learning and additional time you need to be putting in to work in the creative field, is undeniable. And it's interesting to look at this peak age question in terms of commitment. Do you feel like different generations are more committed than others then? Do you see that? Not necessarily in your team, but industry-wide?
I think commitment can be mismeasured. It's not about working long hours anymore. I think it used to be.
Yeah.
In my early career, I was working 12-hour days constantly. It didn't mean that I was better at my job than anyone that worked. In fact, I was probably worse at my job than anyone that worked a proper, just a full day. Because I didn't have my time management skills and I didn't have my prioritization skills, and I was learning all of that. But I was willing to put in the time to get there. I now encourage my team to not work those kind of hours because I don't think it helps with not having a work-life balance. I think you need that. You need that for creativity. You need that for just job satisfaction as well.
Yeah.
So that could be seen as a lack of commitment in a way if you're clocking off dead on, 5:30. But I don't see it that way. I do think generational differences in how you see commitment is a thing.
Yeah.
I think people are seeing work now as work that fits into part of their life and it isn't their entire life.
Yeah.
That's probably down to things like economic change. You've probably heard this a million times, but people, who are in that younger generation, they're not looking at necessarily being able to buy their own property and save for the same things as maybe my generation did, or even the generations before. So it does make a big difference as to what the end goal is. And I think the end goal now is to enjoy their work.
And if you enjoy it, you're going to be better at it, right?
Yeah.
So that all really speaks to me. I mean, I remember when I worked at Elmwood, I would always leave on Friday at 4:00 when we worked in the studio.
Yeah.
It meant a lot to me that I was able to do that. Obviously, I'd need to work really hard during the week to be able to pull that off. And there are lots of extra hours naturally. That was really expected. But to leave at 4:00 on a Friday just meant a huge amount to me. So I think that's really important, something we shouldn't lose. And I'm pleased that younger generations are embracing that effective working.
Yeah.
I suppose it's not cliche, Mad Men having a whiskey during the day. Like we don't have time for that. We're busy. So I really appreciate that. That makes perfect sense. So regardless of age, what skills or attributes do you think that people really need to embody now in the creative industry?
Staying curious is a really big one.
Yeah.
Constantly kind of exposing yourself to new things, whether that is, going to see a new film or going to an exhibition at a gallery or just hanging out with a 4-year-old. Like, however you get your inspiration, I think is really important outside of work. And then inside of work, I think it's about noticing things. One of the challenges to that is remote working. Especially if you're in the earlier stages of your career, you're not able to observe quite as easily as when we were all in one room together. So there's a challenge to that, but I do think there's other ways to be curious. And I think if you make that a really important part of your learning and development, then you'll make it work.
That makes sense. One of our values, to be honest, at Craft is staying constantly curious. It's something that we really embody and encourage the team to do. How do you find time for it, though?
Well, actually, we're lucky at Taxi Studio because it's part of our way of working. So we carve out play dates where we have, I think they're twice a year, but we just down tools. And the purpose of those days is not to necessarily report anything back to the client or create anything that's, actually commercially useful. It's just to be able to explore together and create together. I actually haven't had any exposure to those yet.
Why?
Well, I missed one because I was not well, but
you.
So,
okay.
But the play date's a really, really good way of doing that. Day to day, I think it's just managing your own time. For me, it's an essential thing. It's something that I'm genuinely interested in. And I think a lot of people that are in this industry are here because it's a passion.
Yeah.
So going to a gallery at a weekend is not something that they feel like is for work. It's just something they enjoy doing.
Yeah, it's
so
really intrinsic, isn't it? It's truly a vocation in design, in strategy, in client services, whatever discipline you are in a design agency, you're probably naturally a bit of a self-starter, right? So it's great to hear that you have that for yourself as well.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about when I go on holiday. I work a lot in FMCG, food and drink. I spend a lot of time in supermarkets in foreign countries looking at their shelves. And that's not because I'm doing research. It's because I'm just genuinely fascinated by the differences between products and brands that I'm used to and things that are new, and how I can take maybe some of that inspiration back. But yeah, it's just, I just like geek out about it.
I'm really pleased that it's not just me that has a camera roll full of shelf shots from like I don't know, random shops where I go on holiday. So yeah, we have some similarities there, which is fantastic because we're both millennials as well. What unique skills do you think our generation brings to the creative workforce?
Yeah, I mean, it's very tricky to group just like, I think it's like 20-year span of people into one group.
Yeah.
But I can speak from my experience of when I graduated, it was during the recession. Right. And I immediately was launched into a very difficult time and an economic instability. I had to be resourceful. I had to be okay with the idea that I had to change my vision for what I needed to do at that moment. So I think it makes us very resilient and flexible. I think my outlook personally as well is that change is inevitable and it's not always a bad thing. So being able to move with the things that you can't control, like the economy and, client changes or whatever that is, just means that you look at challenges a little bit differently. You look at, okay, this is what's in front of me and now I need to navigate it, rather than taking it as an emotional kind of impact of having to step backwards. Yeah. So I think resilience is the key, and that comes through the environment that we kind of grew up in.
That's a fantastic strength to have, like you say, especially in face of client feedback or delivering feedback in a way that's not emotional but actually really objective and builds on the work that's in front of you is such a skill. And it's wonderful to know that your life experience has really built into that skill set for you. Have you ever felt too old or too young for the job that you're doing?
I've never felt too old or too young, but I have felt too inexperienced in the early days. And I think that's totally normal. But I guess with age comes experience, and therefore that gives you the confidence that, you can do it. Yeah. So I don't think that I felt in the wrong generation or for that role personally.
Yeah. No, I'm really pleased to hear that. Yeah. It's interesting that age and experience and confidence often obviously gets wrapped up together. I remember starting life personally as an account exec. I'd just come out of uni where obviously I was hanging out with a bunch of 20-somethings. I think I graduated when I was 20 actually, so it's very young kind of people around me. And then suddenly I was put in a position where I had to collaborate and manage people in their 50s, clients and partners in their 50s or 60s. And it's a really steep learning curve to kind of relate to people much older than yourself and learn how to work with them. But I learned what gave me confidence, which was a really supportive leadership team around me and massive preparation for everything, which I take with me now. What gives you confidence aside from your experience and your age that's wrapped up in that? What else really gives you that push that you need?
I think confidence is a mindset, first of all. But I think it can be impacted by other people, especially if you're empathetic naturally in your personality. So just reflecting on your story there, actually, I realise I have had exposure to people of different ages through my growing up as well. So, parents, friends, or I would always mix with different generations. I even signed up to the Women's Institute when I first moved to London.
I love that. How was it?
It was amazing. And the reason I did that was to get that generational difference in my friendship group, because I was working in an agency where everyone was pretty young, to be honest, like the majority of people. The management team less so, but it was such a big agency that you didn't really have day-to-day interaction with many older people. So I missed that because I wasn't around my parents anymore. So that was a really good way to get that influence and knowledge as well. And I really value that. So confidence, going back to that question, it can be reflected in the belief other people have of you, especially if they're in a leadership position. If they trust you and they believe in you, then that reinforcement can give you so much confidence to just, and freedom as well, right? To explore
Yeah.
your capabilities.
It's really interesting what you say about giving yourself freedom to learn and I guess putting yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit in experiences like that and having that positive reinforcement from your team. How do you embody that with those that you manage and work with?
I suppose it's quite intuitive. I don't necessarily actively think about that. But if I consider how I was managed in the past, I think a lot of my style comes from what I liked about my past managers and equally like what I didn't, you know, what I wanted to avoid. And yeah, I just really remember that when I was encouraged and when I had feedback on the positive things as well as where I could develop, that really helped to build my confidence. So I try to do that with the people I work with and not just people in my team. You know, I think everyone's human. Everyone likes to be told that they did good.
Absolutely. It's important.
Recognized.
Yeah, it's really important. Has there been any advice or wisdom that you've got from someone in a different generation that you've really taken on board?
Yeah, so I recently got a new mentor and I actually picked her because she was from a different generation, an older generation.
Cool.
She's got a lot of experience. She's almost the polar opposite of me.
Okay,
So I
that's
thought
fun.
that's a good way to learn from someone, just to get a different perspective, if nothing else. And she was telling me a story about how to deal with high pressure situations. And she said that she was in a high pressure situation when an email popped up in her inbox, forcing her to it caught her eye and forced her to stop and read it. And it was a story about Navy SEALs.
Okay.
Which is a bit left field.
Yeah.
So part of the training for the Navy SEALs is that they have to be tied by the wrists and ankles and thrown into a swimming pool full of water. And they are told that they have to survive for a certain amount of time,
Oh my God.
which obviously is extremely stressful for anyone. And many of them, as soon as they're thrown in, they panic and their breathing becomes more rapid and they end up having to be rescued. The ones that survive, there's a tactic where you let yourself sink all the way to the bottom of the pool, which is very counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But because you're relaxed, you're not using excess oxygen. So you still have oxygen in your lungs to allow you to do that. And when you hit the bottom, you just gently push off and rise to the top. And I think that really stuck with me because it was a lesson about when you feel like you need to act and you need to get out of a crisis or you need to find a solution, sometimes the best course of action is to not act and take a breath and to pause and consider. And that was a really valuable learning for me because I think we're in an industry that's very kind of do it fast, do it now.
Yeah.
We're so used to that. And I think as you get through your career into those more leadership roles, you do need to spend a little bit more time thinking and a little less time doing. So
that's really valuable.
Yeah.
That's super because the only constant is change and things are speeding up in terms of output, creative output and delivery and expectations. And we're in this sort of hamster wheel. The industry is suffering from that a little bit, I feel. So to know that is it's a fantastic piece of advice. Gave me sweaty palms thinking about the wrists and the ankles, but it's super valuable advice.
It's a good story though. It sticks in your head and I think an anecdote always does. So it does come to me when I'm thinking, oh my God, this is a panic moment. I'm thinking, okay, let's just sink to the bottom of the pool for a second.
That is so valuable. And it's what I love. I mean, the best people in client services have the ability to do that and stay calm and rational and objective in tricky times. And it sounds like that's a really valuable story I'll remember that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pressure to stay current in the design and creative industries in terms of trends and approach and channels and news and everything in our world that we need to be inspired by. How do you stay ahead personally? What's your approach to that?
Yeah, I don't know if I always do stay ahead of everything because it's overwhelming. You can't possibly stay ahead of everything. And I think that's first things first, cut yourself some slack.
Yep.
You're not going to be an expert in everything. But it is important to be aware of things and it's important to know who your experts are. So we're fortunate at Taxi Studio where we've got a head of AI who is helping us to learn how to leverage AI and when not to as well.
Yeah.
And also the safeguarding around that. I mean, there's really kind of tried and tested ways like signing up to the right newsletters and getting the right information, reading the right magazines and books. I mean, in reality, we're so time poor that information is now a lot more bite-sized. So, and I try to limit how long I spend just pouring through information about, the world.
Yeah, you can go all day.
So I think it's talking to people. I really engage with stories, as you might have noticed. So talking to my clients, like carving out the time to sit and chat about the wider world that they are in, and also my colleagues. Having a time, even if it's 5 minutes at the beginning of a Zoom call, to like find out about the broader category or the broader landscape of their lives or whatever that is. So it's amazing what you find out when you have no agenda.
That's brilliant advice, because context is key, but it can easily be lost when you've got back-to-back meetings. It's something I really noticed, to be honest, when we first started working from home, and we had, had a diary full of back-to-back meetings. I was just running around like an idiot. And you'd lose the more, it's not small talk, it's context talk.
The human part.
Or where you sort of look at a brief and go, well, what else is going on there at the moment? Or what have you seen recently in that landscape? And gives you that broader think time, I suppose. I'm sure there's a better term for it than that. But it allows you time and space to just kind of noodle on stuff together. Super important. You mentioned AI there, as we all do now. How are you feeling about the industry right now? That just triggered a thought to me. How are you feeling? Very excited, optimistic, tentative in general about the design industry?
I think there's a lot of benefits that AI will bring for the design industry specifically. And I think that goes back to how we use our time and how we use our skills. Instead of, taking... I mean, if you mentioned Mad Men earlier, and it reminded me that, when you did a storyboard in Mad Men, they'd have to get all the artists to work like, overnight to get the idea that Don Draper had down for the meeting the next day. But now we could do that so quickly using AI. So I think there's value in that, but also a really important role for us to make sure that we're not cutting corners and that the idea is still really key, and we're spending our time on creating the solution with the idea at the heart of it.
Yeah.
Versus maybe we can realize it a little bit quicker. And then equally at the other side, when you get into the crafting part, I do think there's still real value in having a human touch there.
Yeah.
So, I think it's beneficial. I think there's lots of unanswered questions on AI, especially in terms of its impact in sustainability.
Yeah.
So I think there's a level of responsibility we have to take for making sure that we're using it in the right way and not overusing it as well.
Good point. And it's great to know that you're harnessing that at Taxi Studio and you've got a real point of view on that at the moment. I think that's super valuable in itself. We're going to end with a bit of wisdom from you, hopefully. No pressure. What advice would you give someone entering the industry now? And that could be client service specific or more broadly the world of design.
I think it's about being a sponge, and really getting stuck in, immersing yourself and trying to listen and learn as much as possible. That's how I approached it. I used to scribble down literally everything I ever heard anyone say. Yeah. I'd get through a notebook in a week or something.
Nice.
But that's just how I took in the information. And it's personal to each person. But just kind of being critically aware of why did someone say that? Or what's that approach leading to? And how did that work out? Or how could that be done better? And just asking yourself those questions and interrogating things. I think that would be my approach.
That is wonderful. It's so important to stay curious. Like you say, when production is getting quicker and quicker, the skills that you've mentioned there and the ability to soak up context and information and nuance and empathy and all those wonderful things, it's a very, very important time to have those skills. So that is fantastic advice. Thank you. I'm so pleased we got to chat today, especially having your angle from a client service discipline. Obviously, it's something that means a lot to me. And I really appreciate your perspective on multi-generational design teams. I think we've covered a huge amount. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.